a whole range of different reasons it was going to be difficult for me to make this program, because one of the things I never ever want to do in this show is be one of those people who say, I told you so. And I'm not going to say that today either. I have to say that, like many of us, I was expecting the SNP to take some losses. I didn't know exactly how bad they would be, but I knew, frankly, that their election campaign started very late. Like a lot of pro-independence party campaigners, they started their campaigns late and they published their manifestos late because they wanted to see what the main parties were doing first. Now, that's just a normal tactic. But the SNP is offering its actual pitch to the electorate in this general election was slightly confused, and it's always going to be confused because the SNP as a party of government in Scotland is a party of devolved government in Scotland. So Mr. Swinney's command, if you like, of the party is not as strong as it would have been had he been in command of, let's say, a party which was always standing at Westminster and had more seats, which it, doesn't have a share of the seats that's equal to England's. If this were an equal union, we'd have the same number of seats as the rest of England has, but we don't. So he's always on a difficult wicket no matter what happened. And as I mentioned many times before in previous programs, this general election is not about independence at all. It is simply about how many pro-independence MPs we can elect to Westminster. And thereby hangs the problem. The problem is that whoever we send down there cannot make any difference to policy in that parliament. They can stand up, they can, as they've said many times, make Scotland's voice heard loud and clear, but the end result is always the same: laughter. We are mocked and derided, and we have no power. And we're really, our politicians in Westminster are there for that purpose. They're there to be laughed at and ignored. They're there to show just how outnumbered the Scots are and how futile it is to attempt to change things from inside the British system. Now, it's certainly true that the Tories have had their worst electoral defeat of all time in their entire history. They've never been defeated as badly as they have this time, which is small comfort to the people of Scotland. But on the other hand, for the people of England, it might seem like a breath of fresh air to have a new party in the hot seat at number 10. But Sir Keir Starmer has gone to great lengths to make his party as close to centre-right politics of the Tory party as he possibly can make it. The idea for him was not to scare the Tories out of voting Labour, and he seems to have largely succeeded in getting many of them to convert. So as far as England is concerned, it's kind of more of the same. As far as Scotland is concerned, well, we don't know exactly yet what Sir Keir Starmer has in store for Scotland. What we do know is that he's never going to give us a Section 30 order. And I think one of the first acts of all of the independence parties in Scotland should be, as soon as Starmer has got his feet in the door at number 10, to write to the Prime Minister and actually get him to confirm in writing that he will never give Scotland another Section 30 order. That there is no chance that Scotland is ever going to be given the opportunity to exercise its right to self-determination. By doing that, we can thereby confirm that democracy is being denied to us, and there we have the evidence that we need to go to the International Court of Justice and to make a representation to the United Nations saying, look, we're being denied normal democracy. So this union, which is meant to be voluntary, is not voluntary at all, and we are actually a colony. However, let me talk a little bit about the fallout from the election. As we know, the SNP has lost most of its seats. It's down to, the last time I looked, I think it was 10 seats. Certainly a low number. It's certainly been a disaster for the SNP in Westminster. Alba, as far as I understand it, did not get many votes at all. In fact, barely featured on the electoral calculus. I think it had something like 2%. So there was no way that anybody voting for Alba was going to swing this away from the SNP. So for SNP activists to blame anyone who voted for Alba for the collapse of the SNP vote would simply be untrue. The SNP vote just didn't turn out. Either people didn't vote, or they voted for either another pro-independence party or for Labour, because there can't be anything else that could have happened. Now, yes, thousands of families were denied postal votes in Scotland because the Tory party made sure that this election happened at a time when every Scottish family with children would be going on holiday, and they knew, because they did it on purpose, that sending the postal votes out a little bit late would mean that those thousands of younger family members, those young parents, would not be able to vote in this election. They just were going to be disenfranchised. So we knew that would happen as well. So there was this perfect storm of things that were going on which were working against both the SNP, ALBA, the ISP and the SSP, all of the parties of independence. I should mention the Greens there as well. They are still nominally pro-independence. They saw their vote, if I remember correctly, their vote went up a little bit in England. I'm not sure what it did in Scotland. However, one of the things I noted, and I think this is something that we should all pay attention to because it gets basically skated over a lot of the time in the media, is that after Alex Salmond, well, I was going to say lost the referendum, but after the referendum was lost and Alex Salmond resigned, he spent some time in the years afterwards looking for a television company or channel which would carry a chat show or some other show in which he would have a role. Now, he couldn't. Nobody would offer him a job. He did take his own chat show to various TV channels and they all refused. And of course he, as we know, ended up going with RT because nobody else would take his channel. But look at what happened to Nicola Sturgeon. Nicola Sturgeon has been offered a plum job at STV as a political pundit. Now, why would that happen? Why would the British state media want Nicola Sturgeon to become a political pundit? This is part of an overall policy which the British state has had for hundreds of years, which is in order to make their enemies look foolish, they take the leader, bring them low in some way or other, cause them to fail, to fall from grace, create some kind of scandal. And we also now know, incidentally, that the so-called case against Nicola Sturgeon's husband, Peter Murrell, has collapsed because there is insufficient evidence, and that was announced on the eve of the close of the vote. So up to that point, everybody thought Peter Murrell was potentially heading for a court case, and now he's not. All of these things are adding up to the British state manipulating Nicola Sturgeon. They've put her in a place now where they've offered her a job as a political pundit, which is intended basically to rub her nose in it and ours. This is your disgraced leader. Now she's reduced to appearing on our television channels, commenting on the defeat of her own party. And this is something which the British state has done ever since the 11th century. They will capture a leader, parade them through the streets, mock them, bring them low, and show the Scots just how their leader has been basically defeated, and so roundly that they're basically pilloried and humiliated. And this has been going on for centuries, and that behaviour hasn't changed. And yet it didn't happen to Mr. Salmond in the same way. And I suspect the reason for that is that the British state knew that Alex Salmond was more dangerous because he was far more committed to the cause of independence than was Nicola Sturgeon. Nicola was a much more moderate left-wing politician who had a particular interest in gender politics, which was her undoing, inevitably, or one of the things that led to her undoing. So I think the way this is working out at the moment is that the British state is having a field day in its media, mocking Nicola Sturgeon, parading her on STV as a pundit who's being forced to comment on her own party's demise, and laughing about it. And basically that is what the British state is all about. Mock your enemies, bring them low, make sure that their supporters feel defeated and will not rise again. Now that is classic. Keeping people divided, keeping people repressed, and keeping them suppressed, and that is going to keep on happening. Now, I've also read one or two columns by pro-independence bloggers this morning, most notably Wee Ginger Doug, who I read regularly because I love his content, and I also find him extremely humorous and sarcastic. Today's piece by Paul Kavanagh-Mawson, he goes through in great detail why he thought the SNP had failed and pointed out various things I've already mentioned, like the Gender Recognition Reform Act, the Hate Crimes Bill, and the fact that the SNP effectively lost touch with what its electorate wanted and started wandering into areas of what we call hobby horse politics, where people's own special projects, things like gender recognition reform and so on, are featuring where they really shouldn't be. And also the Green Party suffered from this as well. Remember, the Green Party is meant to be campaigning to reduce global warming, to reforest large areas of our countryside and to clean up pollution and prevent it. They had wandered off topic as well into the same region, and that was causing problems for everybody. Forgive me, I just get rid of a message on my screen there. So, Paul Kavanagh-Mawson's piece this morning went through a lot of these things, but the one thing I noticed that was missing was any acknowledgement that the independence movement, and that I mean by that everybody, including the parties of independence, everybody who wants independence in Scotland, there isn't an acknowledgement yet in Paul's writing that the SNP needs to reconnect, either with the other parties of independence or with the movement in general. But this is the wake-up call that we all expected would eventually happen, that the SNP would finally be basically brought up short, because voters get to a point where they think, well, the people I'm voting for are no longer doing what I wanted them to do and what they said they would do, and what is the entire reason for their party's existence. They've lost sight of that. And the only way they're going to pay attention is if I stop voting for them and they lose seats. And I was saddened this morning actually listening to an interview on the BBC Radio 4 programme. I think it was Good Morning Britain or what, it was one of these. Anyway, BBC Radio 4 interview with Joanna Cherry, who lost her seat in Edinburgh. And of all of the SNP's politicians, perhaps Joanna Cherry is the one I feel most sorry for, because I know that she greatly disagreed with the direction that the SNP was taking on gender politics, particularly, amongst other things. And Joanna Cherry is really one of the people who I hoped would have survived in place. But failing that, I would hope that Joanna Cherry might run for Holyrood, because she is one of the most capable female politicians the SNP has, and she's a realist. She's also a King's Counsel. She's a very highly trained and knowledgeable barrister who knows the law inside and out. So she acknowledged the failures of the SNP, but as yet nobody has, so far at least, gathered themselves together and started to focus on what we really need to do next. And as I mentioned in previous programs, in the next 2 years, all of us, the entire pro-independence movement, including its parties, including all of its organisations and hubs, including Salvo, including Liberation Scotland, all these groups are now going to have to be pulled together by somebody or something into a credible and unassailable force for independence when it comes to the Holyrood election, which is really the important one, because it's at the Holyrood election where there is actually a chance that we can have a plebiscite election which will allow us to vote on the issue of independence only. And that general election can be turned into a binary choice between staying in the Union or leaving it. But it requires every single part of the movement to act together and work on the same agenda all the way through to that election campaign starting, and including and all the way up to polling day, in the same way that we all did in 2014. Now, whether Alex Salmond or Nicola Sturgeon or any of the other leaders are relevant to this is actually not the point. The point is what happens now. I have always maintained that what is lacking, or has been lacking, in party politics in Scotland is communication and coordination. The two C's, really. Communication and coordination. We need, I would add a third C, cooperation. We all need to cooperate. We all need to talk to each other, and something, some form or body needs to coordinate all of our activities leading up to 2026. Now, various proposals have been made both by the SNP, by ALPA, by the ISP and various other parties to form some kind of Scottish independence committee, some kind of super external Scottish parliament, if you like. If you like, it would be a parallel liberation parliament. And in that, we could then decide to leave the Union. Now, we would have to win a share of the vote which was larger than the Unionist share of the vote at the next general election to do it. And to do that would mean that vote splitting wouldn't actually be possible. And in order to win it, the SNP would need to change one of its central core principles, and that is in Holyrood elections, they need to stop insisting on SNP 1 and 2. Because by voting SNP in both votes, well, would it make a lot of difference? It would in parliamentary arithmetic. But if this next general election in Holyrood is not about parliamentary arithmetic, but is simply about pro-independence votes, then as long as you voted, say, SNP in the first vote, and you voted for another independence party in the second, then we can build up a vote majority in favour of independence. And at the end of the day, the numbers of those votes are always tallied anyway. And once they are tallied officially by the Electoral Commission, and we need to have a very independent body to check that, but once that is done, if we have more votes than the Unionist parties in both first and second votes at Holyrood, then we have a clear mandate from the people. It's the settled will of the people to leave the Union. Alex Salmond has said that if that was the case, then he would bend the English Parliament to the will of the Scottish people. He would not sit there and say, well, they're not going to let us go. He would fight it. Now, we need other politicians to say the same thing. In fact, we need all of our politicians to say the same thing. And we need all of our supporters to say the same thing and to do the same thing. Unless the entire country is united, none of this can ever happen. And so unity is the key thing. The 3 C's are what we need. We need cooperation, coordination, and communication. All of those things, if they happen and all the parties learn from this mistake, particularly the SNP, who've had a real slap in the face, now is the time for it to start changing. And I dare say, I'm not sure if Mr. Swinney has resigned this morning, I haven't seen all of the news results, but somebody new needs to take charge of the SNP and shake it out of its denial and shake it out of its sort of comfort zone and say, look, it's time that we stopped mucking about with party politics and actually fought for independence. That's what this party was founded to do. And that means a lot of hatchet burying, it means a lot of peacemaking, and it means a lot of negotiating. And that is what has to happen in the next 2 years. And it has to start happening right now. So that's my message to all of us today, that we aren't defeated here, but we've been shown that the future can be an awful lot worse if we don't do something about it. And the clock starts ticking right now, because that general election in Holyrood in 2026 is likely to be the only opportunity we get. Starmer is going to move against independence when he can, if he thinks that there is a threat to the unity or the unity of the unitary state of the United Kingdom. He's not going to just let us walk straight towards this. So we're going to have to do it as an entire country, not just as parties. Parties are easy to pick off. We've seen that now. We've seen how the SNP could be defanged. We've seen how various members of the SNP's government can be got at, persuaded, threatened, cajoled, blackmailed even perhaps by the British state into throwing in the sponge, effectively giving up on the cause. We can't allow that to happen again, so we need some leaders who are not corruptible. We need the untouchables literally here in order to get this done. Anyway, that is my message for all of us today. This is not the end. This is one battle that's been lost, but it's a battle that's not been fought in Scotland. It's a battle that's been fought in England. It's been won in England by their Labour Party. They're going to form the government which is going to boss us around over the next few years. Our job now is to get out before Starmer has a chance to do anything more drastic than has already happened to us. Anyway, that's it from me today. Please keep the faith, but let's all talk to each other in a bit more civilized way. Let's stop slagging each other off for past insults or whatever else. It's time we started talking about the 3 C's. Cooperation, coordination and communication. We need those 3 things, and we need them to start happening right now. I'll see you very soon. Bye for now.